Texas Governor Greg Abbott is sparking a national conversation about states' rights. He's calling for the first constitutional convention in more than 200 years. He says he wants the states to make 9 constitutional amendments to, quote, rein in the federal government and restore the balance of power between the states and the federal government. He's looking for support from other Republican governors.
The Texas plan includes amendments that do what so desperately needs to be done, and that is to put teeth into the 10th Amendment.
And that is our topic this half hour. So is this a long shot, or could a convention really happen? We want to hear from you on our Fox 26 Facebook page, where we've posted our topics this morning. You can also send us a tweet. Be sure to use the hashtag Fox26forlife. Joining us live in the newsroom is our panel, led by our Fox 26 senior legal analyst Chris Tridico, our news analyst Mustafa Tamiz, and we have conservative activist and attorney Jared Woodfill filling in for Jackie this morning. Hey guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I guess none of you won the Powerball, since nobody did. You're all here. That's good. Okay, so what do you think about this? Is this a long shot, and does Abbott really have a lot of pull with other states?
It's absolutely a long shot. Greg Abbott will get some other states to join in this, but it is a long shot. This has happened a couple of times in our history. The biggest high-profile one I can remember is the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s, when they wanted to have an amendment to say women are equal to men. The government gave them 7 years to get that accomplished. They couldn't get enough states legislatures to join in to force the amendment. Someone reminded me that Price Daniel tried it when he was here in Texas. I don't remember that. I don't know if y'all remember that. Y'all aren't old enough to remember that. I don't remember that. So it's very difficult to do. Let me just real quick before we go to the panel. It takes 34 state legislatures to pass the legislation forcing an amendment. So 34 legislatures have to meet, pass this, then it goes, and then 38 states have to approve it in an election before it becomes an amendment to the United States Constitution. And Jared, you're a lawyer. That's a pretty difficult process to get through.
It is challenging, and rightfully so. We don't want to make it easy to amend the Constitution. But the reality is, this is a response to a federal government that's out of control. It's a response to a president who has been using executive orders to trample on our rights. It's a response to a Supreme Court that has taken and really trampled on the will of the people by overturning what we've done in the form of marriage amendments. Here in Texas, the Republican Party has actually addressed this in their platform. There is a provision, there is an actual plank that the grassroots activist has created calling for a constitutional convention. And in fact, Senator Paul Bettencourt actually had a resolution that he proposed in the Senate, and Rick Miller in the House during the last session, that I think ultimately will get through. So it's a response to a problem that we're seeing from an over-intrusive federal government, and we need to call a stop to it.
But what would have happened in 1964 if the states had gotten together and said, we don't like our government giving African Americans these civil rights, and said, let's amend the Constitution? We have no system if we amend the Constitution every time we disagree with the U.S. Supreme Court.
And that's why it's so challenging, though. That's why you have to have 2/3 of the states to call this, and then you have to have 3/4 of those legislators approve that. So it's a high bar, a high hurdle to achieve, but it's a problem that needs to be dealt with, and that's why we're having this discussion today.
Is it a problem that needs to be dealt with?
Well, I think that those that are forcing this issue should think about this in a sense that what makes us strong, what makes us the world superpowers, that one nation under God, that, with liberty and justice for all. If we're not that, then we become like the European Union, where individual states are very strong, like Germany is very strong, France is very strong, but the Union's very weak. We are the only world superpower, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why we're only 5% of the population, but we use 25% of the world's resources and enjoy a higher quality of life, because we're in a position where we're one. Now, if we start breaking up, then we will no longer be a superpower.
Let me go to Sally. She's monitoring our social media.
Okay, let's check in on Twitter first and see what some folks are saying on there. We want to check in first with @RWN with Job. Thanks for tuning in this morning. He says it's an Article 5 convention of states, not a constitutional convention. And then Alex Goodman says, God bless Texas and Greg Abbott. Take the power back. And finally, J.K. Roberts says, when I think of people that shouldn't be allowed to rewrite the Constitution, Greg Abbott is somewhere near the top of the list.
Well, let me address that first one first. It is an Article 5 issue, but calling it a constitutional convention, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't change anything. Where they're not trying to start a new constitution through Article 5 of the United States Constitution. That's what Greg Abbott's talking about. There is a procedure in place if we don't like what the Supreme Court does. There's already a procedure in place to change that, right? I mean, the United States Congress and the Senate can pass legislation to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, yeah. That's our checks and balances.
Well, but at the same time, there is a provision in place in our Constitution, Article 5, that allows states to do this. And the reality is we have a federal government that is trampling on our 10th Amendment rights. And the reason we're even talking about this today is because the federal government is trampling on our 10th Amendment rights. That's why 4 states have already joined in to what Texas is doing right now. So I think you're going to continue to hear an outcry from the states if the federal government, which I believe it will under Barack Obama, continues to trample on our 10th Amendment freedoms.
You know, we've heard this time and time again over history. In the 60s, when the U.S. Supreme Court first passed on marriage and they said there's nothing wrong with blacks marrying whites and we're overturning those state laws, we had these same arguments come up. Does anybody still believe that blacks and whites shouldn't marry?
I hope not, but I think there probably are people in the country that believe that. Look, sometimes we feel like that these type of arguments aren't going to go anywhere, and just let's trivialize them and move them to the side, but they actually do have real impact. If you see what's happening in Oregon right now with Mr. Bundy, he is using the same rhetoric. He is saying that the federal government is tyrannical and they're forcing, they've got the boot on his neck. And so him and others have taken guns and they've gone into a federal building and taken it over. So this type of rhetoric isn't just talk, it actually is having real impact.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. I wish we had more time on this. You know what, I want to agree with Jared on one point. It's very important that we go through a process under the Constitution, whether you agree or not. This is a constitutional process. The states have a right to bring this up whether it passes or not.